Please go ahead, Liz.
I think, yeah, when we're in situations like that, when there's this clear feeling of tension between what everything in me is saying is right and what this institution or authority is kind of trying to impose on us. I mean, I think part of the journey of trusting ourselves in that context is to trust ourselves to decide, like, do I stay and work for change here? Do I stay and speak up, knowing that nothing's going to change, but maybe somehow it's still meaningful to speak up? Do I leave? Do I do some combination of those things, right? So I feel like, yeah, I think, yeah, part of the journey of trusting ourselves is like trusting ourselves to discern, like, what are we being invited to do? How do we balance our own well-being, which might be served best by leaving, with the well-being of others who we might be able to stand up for by staying? Like, all of those are difficult discernment questions. And yeah, we kind of trust ourselves to work through that process. I also think that it's I think something that always needs to be brought into those tensions or that discernment is letting the status quo go. Like, yeah, letting somebody say something like wives are property and not challenging it. Like, what cost does that have by being silent, right? Like, I think institutions and
Yes.
authorities are often kind of like, what's the cost? What's the tension if we actually like wrestle with these things or disagree or if we're called out? But really, like, what is the cost to all of the women and all of the people in a church like that if nobody speaks up?
What comes to mind for me in response to this question and is I can't remember if it was Maya Angelou who said this or Brene Brown, but I think Brene was quoting Maya when she talked about the importance of self-belonging, because when you belong to yourself, you can belong anywhere. And I wish I had the quote perfected because it's beautiful. Um, but I think one way I've seen that at work, it's not a perfect science, of course, is when entering spaces, new spaces, or choosing to remain in other ones, it creates, like, at least for me, this internal check and balance. It's like, okay, in this moment, what does my self-belonging have to say? What's true for me right now? And then with a new community, which is what I'm moving through right now in this stage of my life, it's what happens when I bring the real me to the table. And every time it's received with love, it builds trust. And if then when it's received with harm, then it breaks trust. And that's just kind of the journey I've been on. And it's been a year and a half, and every interaction's built trust, which has been positive. And I'm grateful for that. But yeah, I think that holding that self-belonging piece has been really important to me. And then again, finding moments to bring that truth to the table in relationship. Um, I don't know, it's a little test sometimes, but it's been helpful.
Bethany, I studied up on you a little bit before our meeting, and I caught your presentation at Plywood People from a few years ago. And
Mm.
you interviewed some coworkers, and or a couple of them said um, that I can be myself at this job.
Mhm.
When I'm myself, I can thrive. Can you talk about that a little bit? I think that's very apropos.
Sure. Yes, you pulled out things from the archives there because
Yeah.
it's been a long time since that talk and that research. But yeah, it was this team. I was doing research on organizational culture and diversity, and I was interviewing some Black women, I think, for what you're referencing, David. And they were just expressing their gratitude for their specific boss, even though their organization had a lot of structural issues related to racism. Their boss was incredible and was really proactive about creating a safe place for them. And so they were just saying, because I can be myself here, I bring more creativity, more energy, more passion to my work. It's not about my identity, but because I'm able to be myself, I can do better work for this organization. Um, and yeah, it was really encouraging to hear the power of one leader who's intentionally creating safe places for the people around them.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge for us all is to make sure people do feel as though they can be themselves around you. And
Mhm.
how do you discern that? How do you pause and understand whether they're feeling that way? Lauren, you worked for organizations where you felt some tension with regard to who you were and what the expectations were. I've shared in some of that too. Raj talked about it as well, and I'm sure others share that experience. Can you talk about that a little bit? That's in your book.
Yeah, yeah. So I definitely am so well acquainted with this feeling of existing in a space and feeling like I have to like half myself and half that person again in order to exist and not cause conflict or not create problems. Just to get by, I have to really like sacrifice a large portion of who I am. And what is interesting, what ends up happening is, and I've talked about this before, but I remember feeling like I was lying in both realms. So I was existing in a ministry and I was shutting off the parts of myself that was bothered and like could see red flags and was like yelling internally about these red flags. But I shut that down and it made me feel like I was lying to the people around me. And then I would leave that space and I would exist in places where maybe I could talk more freely about the red flags, but then I would feel like I was lying there as well. Like there's such a fracturing that happens when we force ourselves to exist in these different realms incompletely. So it's and what's interesting too, in the book I write about this, but my deconstruction process happened kind of alongside a trauma recovery process. And there are so many beats in both of those journeys that kind of mirror each other. And I think that more we need to talk more about how deconstruction is a traumatic thing to go through, even though, you know, people will say, I am choosing to go through this process because I know like I have no choice really. But even in that, there can be some trauma and lack of trust. And you know, it's just it's like a big mess, you know, it's a big you pull on that thread and so much comes out.
Love that. Yeah. Are you being true to either experience, whether it's yourself or the context that you're in?
Mm,
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Liz Grant, any thought on this one that occurs?
I think it's just so relatable to hear about these different ways that we are kind of compromising. Um, there is an element where, you know, I was actually thinking about family members who voted for someone I didn't vote for, whose name I will not mention. Um, I think, you know, I want to be a safe place for them too, which is funny because, you know, how do you make space for people who disagree with you so fundamentally, you know, and I do think it is about that conversation, that ongoing conversation where you can say, are we building trust even in the way we're having this conversation? You know, like can we put boundaries around things? We don't yell when we talk, right? You know, like we don't diminish somebody else, their perspective or their viewpoint. We listen and hear somebody out, you know, we don't talk over people, right? They're just some like basic therapy skills, communication skills that take that honestly take a lot of work to practice, even myself, you know. Someone I've been in therapy now for probably a decade. Some of you guys I'm sure have beat me on that number, but it's been a long time for me, and I still have those moments where even like with my kids, you know, I will want to lecture them about some. We visited the Ark Encounter, and I found myself going, um, "Hey, I want to tell you everything about this and why I think it's wrong." And frankly, that is not helpful. That's not what they need, right? Like there's, you know, I can give education to my kids, but frankly, you know, what my kids need more is just kind of the ability to think for themselves, to develop their own intuition, you know, and how am I cultivating those skills? And that's a totally different way of interacting. I think when each of us can approach each other from a stance of, I value you and I want to learn from you, that like curiosity and empathy that is sort of leading that. I mean, that's how we have these conversations, right? It just interpersonally. And that's not about institutions. Institutions is a whole different discussion, but interpersonally, it takes that patience with each other and that curiosity to be willing to go to hard places, right?
Thank you. Yes. So we're talking a lot about how to learn to trust ourselves and be brave when maybe the world we grew up in we don't believe in quite the same way that we used to. There is a question here too about what does deconstruction mean? That's a new term for that's always a new term for somebody, and it's maybe a term that's caught on not all the way across the board, but yeah. Would anyone want to venture a thought on that? I mean, I often will start off very basically saying it means looking underneath the things that present to you on the surface. You know, what's holding them up? What's behind that? What's the motivation? Who's saying it? What's the power relationship? We're discovering that, and oftentimes it's a question of race, class, gender, sexuality, and when we're talking about faith environments, but also things like how you read sacred text, your relation to authority within faith communities. Um, and I think a lot of us are asking questions about those things these days, realizing that they've never been examined all that carefully throughout the history of religion, at least in the United States. I think I just did it. Sorry.
Yeah,
Um,
I love how Sarah Bessey describes it. She describes it as like going up into your attic and realizing like, wow, I have accumulated so much stuff and I don't need all of this. And some of it actually could be dangerous and harmful. I think that is a gentle, lovely analogy. Mine was a lot more violent than that. But I think that hers is very lovely.
I think, Lauren, even with that analogy, seeing it as things that you've accumulated rather than seeing it as the foundation of your house or your life. That whole piece, I would say it's maybe even deconstruction has even started by the time you even give yourself permission to go, I don't have to keep all of this. It took me a long time to even be willing to say that I was dealing with it or that I was even thinking about it. Yeah, because it just felt like, oh, I am literally just blowing up my house, my life, my marriage, everything by asking these questions.
Thank you both. I'm a group facilitator sometimes, and I realize some silence is sometimes a good thing. Brings out the thoughts and the tensions. Um,
David, I would be curious, and sorry if it's derailing what your agenda, but we've talked a lot about the challenges of being brave, the challenges of deconstruction. I hope we get a minute to talk about the beauty of it, like what's hopeful and good and wonderful on the other side of that very scary process.
yes. So once there's like an absence, what are you feeling it? What are you filling that with? And that will happen no matter what. What is the beautiful thing that's even within the process? Like it can even be considered a spiritual discipline in and of itself to kind of, unstructure the things that have been so highly structured. And anyone want to jump in on that? The goodness that's there?
Well, I can start by telling you that what has filled the void is the Denver Nuggets basketball team for me. So
Go.
your
How are
turn,
they
Bethany.
doing?
Go for it.
Are they in the playoffs?
In the playoffs, 2-2 against the Oklahoma City Thunder. So don't tell me if you're an OKC fan. Okay.
Oh, that's awesome. Mine's like what came to mind was just the creativity of it. It's kind of it's not always simple or easy, but I think the creativity and then the meaningful connections with people who are on a similar journey have been really enriching and beautiful and life-giving to me. Um, yeah, it's kind of like all bets are off. So who do I want to be? Who do we want to become? How do we find the inspiration and follow it? Like, what stories do we want to live and tell? Like, it just kind of opens up the world in a way that I find exciting when I don't find it terrifying.
I don't
You
know that
are.
this oh,
Go ahead. Go
sorry.
ahead.
Okay. I don't know this exactly answers the question, but I find myself thinking about Just the freedom of not being beholden to powerful religious interests and their judgments and gatekeeping. I think, as a writer who spends a lot of time just in online spaces reading different things, like I see people still trying to walk that line of like, I want to say what I believe and what's important to me, but I don't want to offend the religious powers that be so much that I'm no longer considered part of their team or whatever. And I feel like, I went through a time, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, of kind of having to intentionally be like, that's not what I'm going to do. That's, that's not who I'm going to be. I don't actually need to walk those evangelical lines and try to stay within this confining circle of acceptability. And I can't do that and be who I am and say what I actually think. So I don't know if that is exactly delight or joy, but I feel like there's a lot of freedom in just intentionally being like, I don't need to please these people. I don't need to toe these lines. I can actually say the best of what I think is true and what I think is good for this world.
That's so good. My friend April says, I hope I don't butcher the quote, but she says something like, "It's been so fun finding God in all the places the church told me never to look." And that for me is how I feel it. I feel like there's so much more liberation, and there's so much more like I feel more empowered to follow my gut. Like if there's something where I'm like, ooh, like I feel spirit here, I feel God here, and it's in a Sikh temple, or it's at, like it's in all of these places where before it's at a drag show or whatever. Like before it would be like, oh, that's not allowed, that's not allowed, I can't think that, I can't feel that. But now I don't feel that fear, and that in turn, like looping back around to what we were first talking about, that in turn builds my self-trust, because I'm following an instinct and I'm being rewarded in that trust.
Lauren, I'd love for you to share with us about just because we just had you on my podcast and what you said about how you and Tim went through it together, and um, how you were essentially able to still um, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I'm trying to think about that's the question. But yeah, can you just talk about like in marriage, how does that work out? Like to be more authentic.
Yeah. Yeah, he's on the call too. He's listening in.
I know it
Um,
feels like I'm with a celebrity because I've read so much about him.
yeah, it's the Tim.
Hi, Tim.
Yeah, I don't, and I'm for there he is. He's taking care of our dog. Our dog had surgery today. So, yeah, it's been a huge blessing, something that I do not take for granted. The more that I talk to people who maybe have deconstructed, um, and they were like misaligned with their spouse as they went through it, I feel super, super lucky that Tim and I kind of were on the same path at the same time. And not always, of course. There are some times where he kind of jumped ahead and I would like leapfrog him. And so there was like some give and take. But when you find space to allow yourself to experiment and to not be confined to a box or labels or whatever, like when you have the freedom to say, I don't know, and to admit that and sit with it, I find that you have more grace for other people to then show up in those spaces. So he would come to me and be like, I don't really know about this. And I'd be like, that is fine. That does not freak me out at all, you know? So having that kind of safe zone, excuse me, with your partner is, I feel like is super special and not guaranteed.
Liz Grant, I am speculating, but I'm guessing that in your work with that resulted in Knock at the Sky, seeking God in Genesis after losing faith in the Bible, I would bet that when you put down the structures of understanding the Bible that you grew up with, or at least some of them, that you found some joy in discovering something new there. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Oh yeah. I, you know, Lauren and I got to talk about this earlier somewhere else. I keep getting to talk about this, which is so much fun for me because I think the creativity that you can bring to the Bible when you consider it a work of art, when you consider it a work of ancestral wisdom passed down to you, when you consider it this gift instead of this demand, I think, for me, it just opened everything up. It just was, all of a sudden I didn't have to have strictures around how I interpreted these stories. So for, in my book in particular, I was looking at Genesis, which is, as you all know, just a mess, right? It's like so many dysfunctional relationships, and it's such an old book. It's very hard for us to relate to many parts of the Old Testament, especially if you've gone through any faith shifting. From the evangelical mold, I think it feels very disorienting to return to some of these older texts that supposedly are historically accurate in every way, right? So it's a complex process to return and to say, what can I actually find here? Where does the Spirit of God still speak here? Even, I think I have a lot of friends who found that question really scary, which is okay also, because everybody's in their own place. But I think for me, it felt so freeing to bring, in my book, I get to talk about origin stories in science and in fine art. And I get to put those next to the stories of the Bible. And all of a sudden, it kind of brought things to life in this really interesting and new way for me that all of a sudden was really inspiring and interesting instead of confining. There wasn't the the it wasn't an archetype of how every marriage is supposed to be, right? Like Adam and Eve as the marriage between one man and one woman, and right, like all of these rules that we've built around this text. What if we look at it instead as this work of art? What if the way that God wanted to tell us about the creation of the world was through a poem? How does that shift something inside of us when we think about what God is like and what we are here for? Yeah, I mean, I could go on and on, but I think just for me, it just gave me permission to find so much beauty and wonder in this text that for me had felt really difficult to approach after faith changes, and being able to instead see it a totally different way. I mean, that was really freeing.
We have just under 15 minutes, everybody. If there's questions, please, this would be a great time to just bring some questions in. I would like to ask each of the panelists a practical question, and that is, what do you do? What's something that you do to seek trust in yourself, or if you're in a tense situation, do you have a technique or a practice or a, a device? If you don't, now you got to think of one, and then you can start using it.
I
Yeah.
do. Oh,
No, go ahead, Bethany.
it'll be quick. I long form hand journaling. I know that's really maybe cheesy, but when my thoughts are spiraling, or when I don't know where to land and like what's most true for me, really just writing it out in a journal has been a really tried and true champion over the years. It's been really good.
That's good. I find myself when I am the most elevated and I feel like I'm most reactive, it usually happens when I'm in a conversation with someone who I feel like is trying to push me back into that like high control, like boxes that I feel like I've escaped. That's when I find myself, freaking out. And it's really tough because there are some days where I feel like I am measured and centered, and I can engage with them in a way with like an eye towards their liberation, our shared liberation. And then there are days, man, where I'm like, wow, I have made no progress. I am reactive. I'm dysregulated for the rest of the day. Like it's tough. So I feel like I have to remind myself, like, whether I feel like I quote unquote perform in a good way or in a bad way, neither one of those defines me. And I just have to remember, like, I am becoming, and this is what it feels like to be in the midst of becoming. And sometimes it's painful, and there's little wins, and you can celebrate those, but don't let either one of them, like define you per se.
Liz Grant, you just watched Nuggets games.
that's my coping skill. No, I would say, let's see. It is different whether I'm like on my own, kind of at home thinking through something that happened, because then I might journal. But when I'm in a moment with, say, a family member who voted for that guy, and I'm getting elevated, I think in general, I have to be the thing I can control is myself, right? I can't control them. They're going to think whatever they think. And by the way, that's allowed and that's okay. Right? Like we actually are not, we're not able to change someone else's mind. All we can do is tell them the truth and be ourselves, right? In that moment. And hopefully we can show up with empathy. Sometimes when I can't, that's a I'm going to the bathroom now situation. You know, like, get the F out, right? I think that has helped me so many times. I remember once I was at my own baby shower and my a great aunt started telling me how a decision I was making about my childbirth was stupid. And that was a moment in which I needed to urgently use the restroom.
Perfect.
But I think even just breathing, right? Like kind of pulling somebody in who is on your team, who has your best interest in mind. Like I might like, hey, my husband Jeremy, don't you want to come over here and talk to us? Right? Like, I mean, I think there are ways that you can even be gentle in that moment and still care for those people in front of you while caring for yourself, right?
How about Liz Jenkins? What's a little thing that you might be doing or big thing to kind of return to yourself and trust yourself?
I don't know if I have any, great skills to offer here, but I do think it's huge, and I think Liz is kind of getting at this too, and Lauren, to take a step back, take time. I need time to think about things. I need time to get in touch with my truest self and what I really think and how I want to be in a situation. And I think, I don't know if y'all are familiar with kind of the like characteristics of white supremacy culture, but one of them is urgency. And I think we do live in this kind
Mm.
of this white dominated US society where things have to happen now. Something's wrong, it needs to be fixed right now. So I think part of my like spiritual practice, and maybe for many of us, is to realize that not everything needs to be fixed now, not everything can be fixed now, not everything can be fixed at all. And many things are not as urgent as we think they are, as we're led to believe that they are.
Really good point. Raj.
Lauren said it at the top of the call, but creating is such a rebellious act in all the best ways. Um, so I started writing my book, The Caring House, that you mentioned earlier, about 9 years ago now, and uh, I it didn't take 8 years to write. It took 8 years to be brave enough to publish it because uh, there's an F word on the page on page one, and I knew that my mom wouldn't like it, and um, and I knew, like, leaving the ministry world for the creative world. Never, it didn't feel like a black and white moment. It wasn't necessarily oh, I'm going to do this now for the rest of my life. It was always like, oh, I'm doing this for a few years. I might go back into ministry. Depends on what's available. All those things depends on how this works out. And so, a year and a half into my creative career, getting this idea for a book and deciding to start writing it. And oh my gosh, it's got this language and it's got these complex themes, and it doesn't necessarily have or it doesn't have a scene where somebody goes to a chapel and prays, and that's how things get fixed in the book. It felt like a coming out of sorts of saying, hey, this is who I am. And I was pretty sure that it meant I would never work in ministry again. And that was such a tough tension for me to go through, but putting it out in the world, actually getting to be on the other side of that, and seeing, I had a friend text me this week who took page 40 of my book, which depicts uh, um, a suicide attempt, uh, and he took it to his therapist and said, this is what I've been trying to tell you. And like I don't care if I sell any of the rest of the books or whatever. Like it may have saved a life. And getting to have those moments, to Bethany's point, where like you trust yourself a little bit and then you get to see what's on the other side. And then you do it again and you get to see what's on the other side again. And that act of creating in particular, of just putting a little bit more of who you really are out into the world. And then like the fact that I'm here with these amazing people tonight is an outcropping of that act. Like Lauren and I didn't know each other before we started this crazy stuff. I'm getting to meet other wonderful people tonight. Darren, who's on the call, all of these I met through just putting stuff out in the world and like white knuckling it, not having confidence at all, going, oh shit, is there any way to take this down if I need to? And then but time after time after time it has resulted in new connections and they're the ones that I really want to spend time with, and that they're people I actually want to be more like, and I don't have to feel like I'm hiding around. um that's the beautiful part of you asked about a practice. So like creating and putting it out there is a practice that has really taught me more about trusting myself, and not because I feel like I necessarily have any greater level of internal confidence, but now I have data. Like I say things and people respond. I find great people. And it's like, well, that's good enough track record for me.
Hey,
Marketing
thanks.
people love
Go ahead.
data.
Well, I have one more question. I just want to say, everyone, thanks for your comments. Shara, about understanding systemic issues that are going on helps you to be more compassionate when you realize it's a systemic issue. Dawn, your note about you and your father is wonderful. Thank you. Thanks everybody for your comments. So appreciate it. Um, there's a point in the end of your book, Lauren, where you talk about what you would say to your younger self or yourself from even just a year or 2 years ago. Um, I'd like to start with Raj. You just finished, so let's start with you. What would, if you could briefly, what would you say to yourself of any at any one point in recent history? What would you say to yourself now that you are someone different now?
When I left ministry, it seemed like that was the aberration, or that I was like going on this errant path. And now that I've been out of it for almost as long as I was in, I can see now. I won an award for advertising design in high school. I won creative writing things in high school. There were all these things before I started going down this path that were equally true, or maybe even more true, of who I was really was. And especially when you kind of take out, I can't remember which Liz it was that talked about these like power structures. When you take out people who are like youth pastors, who it looks really good when they get a kid to go to Bible college and go into ministry, and so it's good for them. And I'm not even saying they did it nefariously, but it was good for them, and they have their own agendas, their own backgrounds, their own damage that has happened to them, that influence why they even told you you should. Uh, and so now being able to look back on that time and say, hey, maybe that was the detour. And I don't regret necessarily that detour. I met my wife through it, and we have a wonderful life and marriage, and those things are good. Uh, but I also can lean into that little voice that says who I really am. Lauren and I talked about, watching The West Wing, and the things that show in particular caused in me, of like, oh, I don't agree with everything that I was raised to believe, because this show is making some really good arguments, and allowing yourself to listen to that part. And uh, when you do that, the person who's on stage, even though they elevate these stages, sometimes they're 6, 10 feet tall, and so the person appears to be 16 feet tall. Um, when you give yourself that permission, it turns that person back into a person-sized person. They are just a regular sized person with their own agendas, with their own background, their own thing. And if, especially, most of them don't have any more education than I do, they don't have any more life experience than I do, they don't have any more wisdom than any of us have. And they're doing the best that they can too. And they exist within a system. And I can choose to be a part of that system or not. And it doesn't make me a bad person. It doesn't make this a wrong choice just because someone with a really loud microphone is saying it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Bethany, what would you say to your younger self?
Oh, I'd probably just hug her while she cried. That's what came to mind.
Mhm.
Bethany, even 2 years ago, just so terrified, so disoriented. And in some ways, I still am those things, but I've learned a lot over the last couple of years about myself, about healthy communication, to Liz's point earlier, about learning how to name who I am and what I need, how to set boundaries. It's been a couple of years of tremendous growth. And so I'd probably just hug her and let her know that I've got her every step of the way.
Well said. Liz Jenkins, what occurs to you? What would you tell yourself having a book out now for a year and a half? What would you tell your aspiring?
I'm gonna stick with what I was thinking,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
was just kind of about the deconstruction and faith change journey in general. I think when I was in the angstier parts of that, the thought occurred to me something along the lines of this journey is hard, but it doesn't have to be so lonely. So I felt like that was kind of what I needed to hear at that time and have needed to hear it many times. It doesn't have to be lonely. Look for people who you can trust with this journey and who can relate and walk it with you, and keep looking until you find those people, whether it's a faith community in person or online or just friendships that you trust. Yeah, seeking community to go through deconstruction with.
Thank you so much. Liz Grant.
I'm trying to figure out which one to answer. I think I'm different in that I'm more playful. I was always pretty playful. I did, youth ministry stuff for fun. So that's got to be a little bit of play in there, right? But I think I take myself and God a little less seriously. And that just is so freeing. So I like to think that that means I'm a little less burdened, a little less anxious. But the anxiety meds might help with that too. So I don't know.
That's great. Thank you. And Lauren.
Yeah, I love this question. And in my book, actually, the last chapter, a large portion of it is me writing a letter to post deconstruction, still in the midst of trauma, Lauren. And part of what I say in that letter is that, like this is going to hurt. Like this is not going to be easy. You're going to take, two steps forward, one step back sometimes. It's going to be painful. But this is what it feels like to come home to yourself. And there's going to be something amazing that happens in the midst of the pain and the confusion. In the midst of all of that, you're going to become the person you were always meant to be. So that's worth it. That's worth the struggle. And of course, I know that if I had told her that, like it would come across very callous, when you're in that very painful, broken spot and someone's like, hey, this is going to be worth it. Like you really just want to punch them in the face, like how can you say that? But just because it feels abrasive doesn't mean it's not true.
Well, these things always happen when they seem to, just as we get going, we've got to end. But that's sometimes a good thing. Thanks to everybody for your time, both all the five panelists as well as everybody who spent some of your day with us. We hope you found something for yourself to keep you going. I will say that we will send a follow-up email so that you can have perhaps a link to this video, if not the transcript, also more information on our panelists. Do check out their books. This is how book publishing works these days. This is how networking and it's connecting. Yeah, it's online, it's ephemeral, doesn't last very long. Our short-term memories move on, but we do start community this way. So I hope you found someone or something that you can connect with in this that you can take and grow. Again, I'm David Morris with Lake Drive Books. Anyone, anything else? We're all good? Okay.
No, just thank you guys so much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you again.